Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room. Today I have Jan Smith with me and I'm so excited. Hi, Miss Jan.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you just share a little bit about who you are? So don't start with your titles like mom, wife, all the things, right? Like tell us who you are as a person, then you can go into all the roles and titles and hats that you wear.
I am Jan Smith, and I'm from Louisiana. I'm a country girl who loves to play the piano. Was from a real athletic family, but basically, I like country, and I like being outside a lot. And um, I,
I
I
love
am a
that.
mother and a wife and a
Yes.
grandma. I said
Mhm.
I wasn't going to be one of those grandmas who squeal and go crazy when the grandchildren call, but I lied.
Awesome. So you've been in the homeschooling world for some time. Can you tell me how you got started in that journey?
Yeah. Well, Roger was in medical school. My husband's a physician. And when we married in our last year of college, and so I'm a proponent of young marriages when you're mature and ready because we had a year of bliss before all the stress of medical school started. But during those medical school years, we met a homeschool family. We'd never heard of such a thing. This was like early 80s. And those kids were so bright and open hearted. They had a real curious or interested spirit in life. They were very biblically knowledgeable. And I just was like, whoa, this is what I want my children to be like. And so that's when we began to pray about the concept of homeschooling. And that's what happened. We met some more in residency in Kentucky, and I'd been bored to tears during my own years of education, and teachers did not like it that I would like to read a book in class and that I could. I'm very much an auditory processor, and when they would say, "What did I just say?" and I could quote back verbatim what they said, they did not like that. They didn't like that. So anyway, I spent my high school years having my books taken away, and I was real active. But anyway, that was a major incentive to me, is I wanted my kids to have freedom to learn at their pace and not be bored for the majority of their time.
Oh, it's so interesting that you say that because I don't know statistically if this is correct, but I do realize that around that second grade, third grade level, that's when kids start to lose that curiosity or that joy for learning.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So
well, what did that look like for you with homeschooling? So, you know how we have our plans and then God has other plans. Did you feel like what you envisioned was kind of like the sweet store that you saw, or were there more like ebbs and flows, ups and downs? What did that look like?
there were definitely ebbs and flows, but when we started, you have to remember I kind of had a clean slate because
Mhm.
I never really known but two families in my lifetime that had homeschooled or home educated their children. So I was very much out of the box. We did a lot of read alouds. We, set up a store to do math, and I wanted it to be fun. And one of the things, the biggest early lesson was that you have the freedom to plan your day around your family's needs. And Roger, as a new physician and just having moved back to our hometown, he had late nights. And so if our kids had traditional school, they would have never seen their father, and they'd already gone through 4 years of not seeing him hardly. And so that was a major priority, was time with dad. So they would stay up until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And at that time they were 6, 5, and 2. And then we added another later. But that was a very important time. Roger would read aloud and do Bible study with them. And, I would feed them earlier, but they would have a snack while Roger ate supper. It was great. It was great. So being able to plan your schedule around the needs of your family is one of the tremendous benefits of homeschooling. And then the freedom to make choices of how you're going to do education, what fits with your family, that's really important. But speaking of ebbing and flowing, after a while you begin to get insecure because I don't do a lot of testing. It was more about just conversation, and we were pretty, not loosey goosey, but we had a lot of fun with our education when they were young. And the oldest two were bright and easy, and we just had a great time. But then I began to question whether that was enough, and I had them tested for the gifted program because one of my friends at church was over the gifted program in our area, and she said, "You should have them tested." So I did, and lo and behold, they were doing great. And of course, then they tried to talk me into putting them in school because they were so bright. How did I dare think that I could teach them? And I thought,
Right.
well, obviously, this is working. So, anyway, that was my kind of first major crisis point. And I put them 1 hour a day in the gifted program because a friend of mine was the teacher in that class, a different friend. She was the Methodist minister's wife, and she was an art major. She did some fun things with them. And then my daughter began to feel like she was behind, even though she was scoring like 98% on all of her tests. I would give a spring test once a year, kind of to see how I was doing and how they were doing, because I didn't know anybody else that was homeschooling at this point, nobody else in our area. And the number one question that I was asked is that legal? When I would say, well, I homeschool. And so, I mean, it was brand new. And so that was kind of my first crisis time that I began to question whether I was enough. And I think that's something that every mother struggles with, no matter how many homeschool families they know, no matter how high their kids are scoring on a test. It's always, we want so much for our children that we tend to question ourselves. And I think that, I'm a believer, and I believe that we have opposition to things that are of God. And I think Satan knows each of our own weaknesses. And that was mine. So I think one of the other lessons I had to learn, besides that, yes, I am enough, is that I need to listen to my children. And my daughter, she felt like she wasn't doing school because, like I say, we had a lot of fun. And it didn't feel like school to her because when she would talk with her friends from dance or softball, then they would talk about all the sheets they had to do. And she never did worksheets. So I went and I bought some workbooks for her in every subject, just simple little workbooks that I found on the market. And every morning after we would do Bible study, I would say, "Okay, Emily, you need to go do your school." And she would go and just fly through her workbooks, fill in all the blanks for the day in all 6 workbooks. And then she would come back and she would be ready to do our reading and her writing and her piano and all the other things that she thought were fun. And so, but learning styles, that was something I had to learn about. And hers, she's a different learning style than I was, and she needed to see it, to write it down. And I was doing a lot of auditory interaction back and forth. Even though she was reading a lot and she was writing, it was a more creative writing, and it wasn't just filling in blanks where she felt like she was accomplishing something. So, I think in general, we as moms need to listen to our children a lot more and really hear what they're saying and go, "Oh, I can meet that need."
Right.
I don't have to totally change what I'm doing, but I can hear that you want to learn about this subject or to do it in this way, or that you need more regulation. My son needed a list so that he knew what to expect. That was one of the lessons.
I
So,
appreciate you for sharing that, Jan, because it's very encouraging to hear that even when your children are doing well, that insecurity still creeps up and that fear still comes like, am I doing enough? Am I enough? Right. And I think you're absolutely right when you say the enemy's always just prowling like a lion, trying to see who he can devour. And a lot of times that's homeschool moms at 2 o'clock in the morning, that thought of, was that enough? Did I do enough? Especially those fun days. It's like we had so much fun. Did we really accomplish anything? I think it's also important to just remind people that God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. So when He calls us to homeschool, He's going to give us everything that we need. But it's so easy for us to get caught up in, am I failing my kids? Am I doing the wrong thing? Did I hear right from God? So I really appreciate you sharing that transparently.
and my third son, he had learning challenges. And so he it wasn't an we got his eyes checked. He did have hearing problems,
Okay.
and his ENT said if he can hear when he's 16, then we've done our job. And so, I mean, he had multiple surgical procedures and tubes and adenoids and tonsils out and eardrum rebuilt and that type of thing. But he had some learning challenges beyond the hearing. And, you know, God humbles us when we need to be humbled. And it was really humbling for me because I kind of, for the most part, when your kids are scoring at the very top of the chart, something's going right
That's right.
about this.
That's right.
And Rodney, he couldn't read. So his test scores were far below average because he didn't read until like fourth grade, which now I know that's not uncommon. And it wasn't true dyslexia as we think of it, but he had some very real issues, and it was very humbling. And so his education looked different than the others. I always say I never did a single reading lesson with my fourth child, who was 2.5 years younger than the third kid, because he just learned listening through the wall of me doing it with
The
the other
sponge.
son,
Yeah.
trying to pull him up. And I would go back out. I would try to separate him because he was embarrassed. So I would do reading separately with that third child because it was just a struggle for him. And he, so I never taught reading to the youngest one. I would come out of the room with Rodney and he'd be sitting there reading a book, having finished what I'd given him to do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, being okay with every child being different and doing what that child needs and focusing on their strengths and not their weakness. So we did a lot of reading aloud, a lot of audiobooks. That even that third child, he loved stories.
Mhm.
Every child loves great
Right.
stories, and adventure. And but he just couldn't read it himself. And that oldest son that scored at the top of the chart, and that second son who didn't read until, fourth or fifth grade, now, if I stood those two boys in front of you and you were interview them about their lives today, you would not be able to tell me which was which
Praise God.
because they both have excellent incomes. They both are married and own their own homes, and one has three boys, one has three girls, and they just, I wish I had known that it was going to be okay, that God created this kid, and I knew that in my spirit, but I kept thinking, well, you're just not doing enough. This doesn't make sense. This should be
Right.
working. And just to be at peace with each child growing at their pace in their time and accommodating their needs.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I remember someone said to me, "Don't love." It was a conference, and she was talking to a huge audience, and she said, "Don't don't love the child that you wish you had. Love the child God gave you." Right. So it's like
Right.
sometimes we're like, "Well, the first one was so easy, or the second one was this. What is this, God?" And God is like, "They're individuals. I'm calling you to love them for who they are, right where they are."
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so that child is now hugely successful, but he was by far my biggest challenge, not just to teach to read, but he's a lot like me. And that's usually the one we have the most trouble with. But he was also very fun. And we just had, our life was much richer, even though it was more challenging
Right.
with him.
Mhm.
He still, I sometimes say, I'm so glad to him. I'll say, I'm so glad I didn't shoot you when we were homeschooling because I really love you now. So it's just, it's interesting to look back and to realize it's going to be okay. It's just going to be okay.
That's a sweet
And
story.
the youngest one, I think God knew that I needed an easy one after that
Okay.
because he was just phlegmatic, laid back, easygoing, no problem. And I remember when that third child graduated high school, I
Mhm.
looked at the youngest one and I said, okay, I know we've got some ground to make up, but I'm going to get you to go ahead and take the ACT at the end of the year. And we're in the South and we take the ACT instead of the PSA, the um,
I think that's it, the
SAT.
PSAT, the
Yeah,
SAT.
yeah. And anyway, so I gave him that, or he went to the high school and took the test at the end of his freshman year, and he scored well above, I mean, what was expected at that point. And you know what his response was? That youngest child, he said, wow, mom, just think what I would have made if we ever did school. Because at that time, the one that was a senior, having a senior is very demanding, but having a
Okay,
senior like that child was very demanding.
right.
And Hudson was doing speech and debate. Roger and I were very active with helping to establish the National Speech and Debate for Homeschoolers, NCFCA. And anyway, so he was reading things he was obviously learning,
Correct.
just was unconventional. It wasn't exactly unschooling,
That's right.
but it wasn't just all the traditional ways of
Right.
learning. And so he scored exceptional on his ACT, he uh, and he ended up being fine. It was great. We had a fun time in their high school years. In fact, those were some of my favorite years. Even though going in, I had the same fears. It wasn't that I couldn't teach them high school. Honestly, my biggest fear of heading into those high school years when my oldest two were junior high is that I liked them so much at that point that I was afraid I was going to mess them up. If they had
Yeah.
to be with me for 4 more years, what if they ended up being like me? And that I was going to really mess up these kids. And I think we ought to consider putting them in school. And he said, are you kidding? What would make you feel that way? And he said, who do you like better, their friends at youth group or our kids? And I said, well, I like our kids better. I like who they are as
Right.
individuals. And he said, Jan, if something were to happen to you and you were to die, he said, I would quit my medical practice and homeschool these kids and work ER on the weekends because we are in this. And I said, well, you need to pray for me because I'm scared. And I went back to the kids and I told them, I said, look, I don't have a choice in this. Your dad says we're doing this. So y'all might as well pray for me because I'm all you got. And, that was before co ops and before all of the big groups. Even though we had a group at that point
Yeah.
that I'd started, I do think that it is fearful when that much responsibility is truly on your shoulders. Now, Roger was very involved and he committed that he would do things like the higher maths and all of the, chemistry. He was a chemistry major. Am I gonna teach him chemistry, really? But, God made a way and he got more involved than ever during their high school years. But it's a faith journey.
Yeah.
No
It
matter
is.
what age they are, it's a faith journey. And then it was unknown. Now, you gals, y'all have statistics. You have research that says this works. But
Yeah.
back then, it was just a grand experiment. And I didn't know any other high schoolers that had long since graduated and were out
Right.
there living life and being successful like
Right.
I do now. That I can
Right.
look at you and other young moms and say, we know this works.
Right.
It's not perfect. It's not a perfect system. You're not a perfect teacher. But if we seek first his righteousness and his kingdom, all these other things shall be added. That he takes care of what your children need and he provides the inadequacies that you have. He provides. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and God will provide what that child needs when that child needs it for you. And I've seen it. I could give you example after example of how that happened in our lives. But when you stand together as a united front and you trust God and know that He requires faithfulness, not perfection. No, we're not pulling it on our own. He pulls His weight and He takes what we offer Him and blesses it, and it's enough.
Praise God. I just sighed a deep sigh of relief as you were sharing because sometimes when you're in what they call the trenches or in the weeds of homeschooling, it just feels, you have all these questions and I think I over assess, like I'm always giving my kids some kind of internal assessment, like, let me see where you are here. But it's really the call into trust God and to have faith and to really understand that this great experiment, like you said, that we call homeschooling, it's all a faith walk. It was never about our ability to be this amazing teacher or this super mom, but it's really to say, God, you gave me these kids as an assignment, and I'm the vessel that you're
That's
using,
right.
but I trust you to make everything perfect in your own time, in your own
I couldn't agree more. Well said, Rob. Absolutely. You know, those high school years ended up being our favorite. And I think it's so important to finish the job in those high school years and not throw in the towel, not feel like they've got to have more socialization or they have to play, high school football for that particular team in order to get
Exactly.
noticed or that all of those things God will cover because in high school, that is when you bear the fruit. You get to reap the fruit of all those years of training and teaching and loving and equipping those kids. You get to watch them learn to fly, really learn to fly, and to be see that partnership with God the Father cemented as He provides opportunities for your children that you could have never provided without Him. And again, I could tell you story after story of things that our kids got to do that were nothing short of miraculous, that God just would provide for them. And it was such a fun thing to get to participate with God our Father in seeing these children launch into
Mm,
who God's calling them to be. Because when they're little, we say that and we know that they're the Lord's and He has a purpose for them. And it's our job to just reveal their bent and the way they should go. But when they're in high school, you see those things take place. And if we can back off enough and
mm,
trust God enough to let them go their way, even in
mm,
high school, to start to individualize and tailor their instructional needs
right.
to what they want and what they need, it is really exciting.
God,
And all four of our children, their high school looked very different. Even
as
though
it
all
should.
of them did speech and debate, even
Yeah.
that looked very different for each child.
Mm,
And they all rode horses, but we all did lake activities. And so we had things that we did together. But even in what each subject looked like for that child, it was different. And yet they say that's one of the most important things that we did was allow their high school years to be really equipping them for where they were going in their life. And the second thing they felt like was most important, is Roger and I've had the opportunity to speak at conferences now. We do have a parenting book, and so we speak on parenting and marriage. And I love my life now. I would have never envisioned that this is what we were going to get to do, but it's
right.
really fun. But we've talked with the kids as adults and said, what do you think made the biggest impact on your life? And one of those things was just conflict resolution training. The
Oh, wow.
training that you as a young mom are doing now of helping them learn how to get along. They feel like that's one of the most important things that occurred in their educational process.
I would have never guessed that. Wow.
So we called it family court, and I would have them, because there were four girls in my family, and we fought like cats and dogs, slapping and pulling hair, and just it was like I said, I don't want that to happen in my home.
Mhm.
And now we all live here in this area, and we're all close, but it's you know I was committed to them not slapping and hitting, and that just wasn't going to be part of our home.
That's right.
And so I spent a lot of time when they were little making them stand there and use words. I said it a million times, use words.
Right.
How did you feel when your sister hit you, and what made you making them work backwards from what happened to why did it happen and how could it have happened differently? And um, they they said when they got to college that friends they would hear them exchange some snippet that caused hurt feelings, and they would want to step in and go, okay, now wait a minute. When you said that, how did that make you feel? And how
Uh-oh.
could you have said that differently? Because they said they
As they're
know that if they
training.
just talked it out and went back and said, I'm sorry, I was feeling insecure and I made a jab, or this happened yesterday. And I mean, because there's always something
There's
behind
always
what we say
something.
or do.
That's right.
And so they just said they realized, oh, wow, if they just talked about that instead of not talking at all for a week, they could have resolved it and it would have been fine.
So, so
So, what you're doing as a mom, when you stop and you're training them, even if I remember when mine were little, and I would think if I could get them up and dressed and do Bible study and have meals, and do conflict resolution, that we'd had a good day.
oh wow. And that's really good perspective because I feel like sometimes we do the Bible study and we do the devotion and then we're like, okay, now let's get to the important stuff. Not realizing that homeschooling is as much academics as it is that heart piece, or like heart schooling. That's probably what it should be called. But I really appreciate you sharing that. I want you to share more about what you're doing now because you kind of took us on the journey from like little teeny babies to adult children. But before we do that, there's something I wanted to highlight that you shared. You talked about flexibility. And I know a lot of people who are either getting started or who've even been doing homeschooling for a couple of years, sometimes we forget the beauty of the flexibility. We try to take the school and put it in our house. We're doing these ridiculously long schedules, or we have the classroom desk, and we're doing it, just mimicking what was not working in public school back into our house. So I wanted you to talk about one, how did you use the flexibility of being able to build your own curriculum? Because I go to a fair now or a convention, and I'm like, I'm overwhelmed by all this choice. So how did you use that to your advantage? Um, I guess we can start there.
Well, I think that it's important to realize that just like as women, we have seasons in our life, that as mothers, you have seasons. Whether you've got a nursing baby and are pregnant, with the second one or the fifth one or the whatever one, that's different than when you have high schoolers and you can blow and go. And that you can't do everything at once because
Right.
we did a lot of different things with them as they were growing up, but not all at one time. And I think so having flexibility to, like, we did a lot of unit studies is what it would technically be called. Even and I did use a lot of different types of things. There wasn't a lot of curriculum available, so I would decide what I wanted to learn about, and we would go to the library and pull together resources, always starting with children's books and always including real people, like when we did World War II, because we never got to that when I was in high school. I was sick of the Boston Tea Party, but we never studied how we were on the same side as Russia when I grew up in the Cold War era. And so, and what does a Jew look like? How did they even know what a Jew was? Because we live in a very rural area, and I'd never seen a Hasidic Jew, a Jew that was identifiable by just
Yeah.
looking at them. So when we went to the library and looked it up, I was like, oh yeah, you could see that was a Jew. Yeah, that's pretty
Right.
identifiable, like a Pentecostal woman here that had with her hair poofed up. So it's um it's just it was fun to be able to be free enough to do that, but we didn't have all the curriculum choices now. And my encouragement to you is there's no perfect curriculum.
Praise God. Say it again.
There is no perfect curriculum. And that, in fact, I am a huge proponent of letting your child help decide what they want to learn about that year. And just like a child eats different things at different times and kind of their body is saying what they need and want, I think that we need to listen more to our children about what they want to learn and build in more flexibility. Delight directed learning is what we used to call it. But a child that is wants to learn something is going to be much more motivated to know it and to learn it. And a need to know, when they have a need to know something, whether that's from internal or some external motivation, they're going to be a more successful student. So you can't learn it all at once.
Right.
And so pick and choose what you do want to learn and how you want to learn it. And as a mom and as a woman, to realize that you are learning and growing with your children, and that even if for a season you have given up some of your career goals, that you are still growing and learning in ways that are going to equip you for that when that time is right for you to step back into those some of those roles that maybe you're not doing at this moment in time while you're pregnant or nursing or have five little ones in tow, that there is a day coming when the rest of who you are is going to be utilized more fully, and
Right.
that who you are today is shaping who you will be when this season is over. And you're going to be better and stronger than ever, not behind,
Mm.
not ill equipped. You're going to be better equipped because I can guarantee you, as a homeschool mom, we step up when there's a need for our children. If someone's not there to provide that need, you as a mama are going to make sure it happens, whether
Right.
that's being a scout leader or whether that's, being the director of the children's musical or the local theater or whatever 4-H club you're starting or chess club. You're going to find somebody to make sure that that happens,
Right.
and you're growing and changing and your children are growing and changing with you. And when that time comes where the children aren't there, there are amazing opportunities waiting for you. Just like God provided for the needs of your children, He's going to provide for your needs because ultimately we're all His children.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So many gems, so many nuggets. You're just like a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. Thank you. So take us forward. You graduated your children. You have adult children right now, but you did not leave the homeschooling world. You and your husband have been very, very busy being fierce champions and advocates for homeschooling or home-centered education. What are you up to these days?
Well, when the kids were in high school, the oldest ones, we started speech and debate in Louisiana because we wanted to raise leaders, and we did raise leaders. And part of being a leader is being an effective communicator. And so at that time, NCFCA had started, and we had heard about that and got involved in that and helped to build that league. So we built relationships with people throughout Louisiana, in different communities throughout Louisiana, because through our speech and debate involvement for our children. So when the children were graduated, we got involved in our state organization, and almost every state has an organization. I know that you're involved in helping to start New Jersey's organization, and you got a good taste this year as to why it's important.
You sure did.
That's right. I've been praying for you and championing you, and so proud of the work that you have done to pull together leaders and had people show up. You see, God showed up for you, and you see now why it's important to have a network statewide. Well, that's the case in Louisiana as well. And so we've been involved in our statewide organization, even though when our children were little, that's not what God called us to. We were starting our local group. I went every year to our state convention, but God met that need through other people at that time. We got involved after our kids had graduated high school. There were leadership needs on a state level, and we had a variety of people ask us to get involved, and we did. We went to some national meetings that state organizations have available to them through the National Alliance of Christian Home Education Leadership, as well as the HSL Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So when we went, the first year we went to those meetings, we were like, okay, this is cool, and we were really impressed and met a lot of people, and we were going to try to lay low, but as leaders, laying low doesn't work very well for us because we care about others and we were meeting people and interacting. And in a couple of years, we were asked to be on the national board. And so we are very much involved on a national level. Roger has started a foundation called the Impact Foundation for Research, Investigate Impact. And so we have several research projects in the works. For one of the ones is to research how are students that graduated homeschooling age 20 to 50 doing in real life world
I would
and
love to see
comparing
that.
that with other things. So we're real excited about it. We know a lot of those kids because of the homeschool speech and debate. We knew kids all over the country. And so our involvement, we were on the national board for that for about 10 years, or at least Roger was. And which as a couple means, we were very involved in that league for 10 years. And so we knew personally a lot of families, and we're excited about that. And because we know leaders from around the country, then and did all that speech training and speech coaching, those 10 years of NCFCA, um, God has opened doors to speak. And so that's what we're doing now.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else on your heart that you want to share? Maybe a lesson learned or something you wish you knew when you were in the trenches? And
Well, my latest project that I'm working on is called Career Woman Interrupted, and it is a heart that I have for young women to know that being a wife and a mother is an option for them, and that they don't have to choose one or the other because women have so many opportunities and it can look very different for women today. And even while homeschooling, a lot of women, continue to work in various capacities. It may not be a 12-hour day in a corporate headquarters, but you know, a lot of people would say that what I did while I was homeschooling my children was like work because of the leadership roles that I found myself in to help meet their needs.
Mhm.
And, and many women find that to be the case. I wasn't paid for the work that I did, but technically I was in a working woman role.
That's right.
Often I found myself in those ways. So, um, but I just want that message to be heard loud and clear is that young women don't have to do like many women in my generation. They felt that we had earned a seat at the table, and many women, both black and white, and had tremendous careers, but they had to fight long and hard for those careers.
Right.
And now I feel like a lot of women have pressure to say, well, if I stay home and have children or I stop this great job that I have, then my education will be in vain and that I will be betraying those who went ahead of us. And that's not true. Don't do, I want them to hear the message. Don't wait until you're 40 because of your career to try to have a child. When you get married and you're happy, have your family young. And that you've got, we're living longer as women, and you've got a lot of life after your childbearing years to do many great things. So you can't you can't do it in reverse.
Mhm.
There are seasons of life, and there are seasons where having children is really not an option anymore. So do it while you're young and to trust God that those other opportunities will still be there. It hasn't launched yet, but it's very, very close, and I'm excited about it. But that's what I've got going right now, besides
Awesome.
speaking doing some
Yes.
writing is I really want to launch that podcast. It has nothing to do with homeschooling because it's not to promote homeschooling, it's to promote as women, we have the option and encourage them.
And thank you so, so much. I enjoyed this time. And I don't know if you saw me like kind of shifting my eyes to the side, but I was taking notes as you were talking. I'm like, this is blessing me. Praise God. So thank you so much.
Well, amen. Yes. Keep up the good work. I know y'all had a hard fought battle this year. There are more to come. So we're excited about your organization and appreciate the leadership that you're exerting already.
Praise God. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.